court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. There was no proof that the accused, Ms. Tracy Johnson, committed this crime. There were many assumptions, but no direct evidence made about this case. There were no witnesses. There were a number of other people who had motives and could have framed Ms. Johnson. Many witnesses established Ms. Johnson's good moral character. Lastly, Ms. Johnson has a very strong alibi that shows she could not have committed this crime. There was no proof. Only two pieces of evidence made Ms. Johnson the suspect. These two items were only circumstantial or indirect evidence at best and do not include any physical evidence such as fingerprints or any other proof. These two objects are the flashlight and the glove. The flashlight was marked with both the code of the record computer and Ms. Johnson's initials. But why would Ms. Johnson, a very smart girl, leave such incriminating evidence just lying there? Also, she never stated that the flashlight was hers. Even Principal Chris Bazemore admitted that she's not sure the flashlight was Ms. Johnson's. Ms. Johnson never stated that the gloves were hers either. Why would they be hanged by the slats of the locker? If they were Ms. Johnson's, she would have put them in properly or taken them home. Detective Marty Lane confirmed that he did not find any fingerprints that can prove anything. Detective Lane had checked Ms. Johnson's hands for red paint when he took her to the station. He found absolutely no trace. There were many assumptions, but no real evidence in this case. Mr. Kelly Stone assumed Ms. Johnson committed the crime because, first, he knows that Ms. Johnson was upset with the grade of B he gave her. Second, he had heard that Ms. Johnson had called him a jerk. And third, he knows that Ms. Johnson does not like his teaching style. However, there are 3 other grades changed other than Ms. Johnson's. There are also others who have called Mr. Stone a jerk. And lastly, Mr. Stone admitted that there are others who have had complaints about his teaching style. In fact, Ms. Jody Wells, the counselor, shared how other students have complained and felt that Mr. Stone's teaching style causes a significant amount of emotional disturbance and hindrance the children from learning. There were no witnesses. Detective Lane interviewed Ms. Richardson, who saw 2 people on the night of the crime, but she did not say she saw Ms. Tracy Johnson. Those 2 people could have been any other students who owned leather jackets and sweatshirts. The bottom line, there were no witnesses to this crime. No one can actually place Ms. Johnson at the scene of the crime that night. There were a number of other people who had motives and could have framed Ms. Johnson. Mr. Kelly Stone himself admitted that he doesn't like Ms. Johnson. This could be a reason for him to want to get Ms. Johnson in trouble. Detective Lane testified how other students disliked Ms. Johnson. Ms. Jody Wells also shared how other students can't relate to Ms. Johnson and has actually seen them harass Ms. Johnson. Those same students might want to frame Ms. Johnson. Many witnesses established Ms. Johnson's good moral character. Principal Chris Bazemore testified that Ms. Johnson, 1, cares about computers, 2, has never been in trouble before, and 3, is a straight A student. She added that Ms. Johnson has plans on going to college and being successful. Someone who plans on accomplishing so much doesn't commit such a mindless crime like vandalism, would they? Ms. Wells knows Ms. Johnson very well and admires her academic ability. She added that Ms. Johnson is honest and has no other disciplinary infractions on her record. She does not believe Ms. Johnson would change grades nor vandalize computers. Lastly, Ms. Johnson has a very strong alibi that shows she could not have committed this crime. On the night of the crime, she was at home studying with Ms. Bailey Martin. Mr. Pat Johnson testified under oath that Tracy Johnson and Bailey Martin were indeed at his home until 10 p.m. and that Tracy stayed home all night after that and could not have snuck out to commit the crime. Ms. Martin also confirmed that she and Ms. Johnson were together studying at the Johnson home during the time of the crime. She left at about 10 p.m. as Mr. Johnson stated. Ms. Martin's testimony confirms the strong alibi that Mr. Johnson has provided. In conclusion, other than very weak circumstantial evidence, nothing ties Ms. Johnson to this crime. Other students had a motive to change the grades and vandalize the computers. Ms. Johnson is an intelligent student with a 3.6 GPA who has never been in trouble before and who loves computers so much she wouldn't even think of vandalizing one. Last but not least, both Mr. Johnson and Ms. Martin testified under oath that they were together with Ms. Johnson at the Johnson home during the time of the crime. Ms. Johnson could not have committed this crime. And remember, unless you are sure beyond reasonable doubt that the evidence proves Ms. Johnson committed this crime, which it does not, then you must do what is just and find her not guilty. Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Casey.